Okay, so in this video, I wanted to go over how to start Visual Studio and how to build a simple project using Visual Basic. The thing is, I know some of us were having issues downloading Visual Studio from DreamSpark because Visual Studio 2012 wasn't there anymore, or the professional version wasn't, only the premium was. And then I know some of us were having trouble installing the premium version of Visual Studio 2012. So another option would be to also maybe download Visual Studio Community Edition, the 2015 one. Right, so that's what I'm going to use here. So I'm going to test it out. I believe it's almost the same as 2012, so you'll be able to use your textbook anyway with it. So to do that, I'm just going to go to Start. I'm going to type Visual Studio. And you can see here I have both versions. I have 2012, a bunch of other stuff pops up, but I'm going to launch Visual Studio 2015. This is the first time I use it. I would like to see how it works. So yeah, it's the Community 2015 edition, and it's free. Okay, so here it wants me to sign in. I'm gonna pass on that for now, maybe later. Start with a familiar environment. We could set up the development settings here for Visual Basic, and then you can choose the different themes. I'll leave the original theme. And I'm gonna hit start, and it's gonna set up everything. So this is probably gonna take a little bit. So I'm gonna pause the video at this point, and I'll be back after it loads. Okay, so after it finishes loading for the first time, it shouldn't take that long the next time that you run it. You're always going to end up seeing this here where it says start page. I usually just close it out. And the Solution Explorer here in this panel, or pane as it's called, you'll usually see the files that you're trying to work with when you're building a project. And one of the most important panes that you need is going to be the toolbox. So here it's minimized, so I'm going to click here, and then I guess it's going to load the controls. What I usually do with the toolbox is I like to pin it down. I'm going to press a little pin here if it lets me. Okay, so I'm going to pin this down so that way it doesn't auto hide. I'll have my Solution Explorer here, and the other pane I'm going to need, let's see here, under Windows, no. I need the, under View, I need the Properties window. Right, so I went under View, Properties window, you can also press F4. So I have Solution Explorer, Properties, and Toolbox. That's pretty much all you'll need to start working on your projects. Okay, so to start, we go to File, New Project, and then our templates, it's automatically set up for Visual Basic. And then we're going to want a Windows Form application. And then here what we're going to do is we're going to name our project. I'm going to name it Wage Calculator. And then I'm going to press OK. Okay, so now everything loads. So we have our form here and some other files that you won't need to mess with for now. And then here are all the different tools, controls that you can put on your form here. Right, so what we want to do is we want to build a wage calculator. For a wage calculator, we need two pieces of information. We need the number of hours worked and the wage per hour. Right, so if you make minimum wage, then you're earning probably $7.25 an hour, and usually a normal work week is 40 weeks unless you're part-time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out all the controls that we need so we can build this. So we need some text boxes. So I'm going to do one text box. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to get another text box and put it there. The thing is, these text boxes, if we just run this right now, the user's not going to know what information needs to go where. So it's a good idea to put a label next to each text box so that we can identify what each one is. So then here, let's just say they enter the number of hours they work. Here they enter their wage. So then this takes the input from the user. Then we need the output from the program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another label here, and then maybe one more here so we can identify this as the output. Alright, so we have label 1, label 2, label 4, label 3. We have a text box, another text box. And then the last thing we need is to actually give a way for the user to interact with the program. Other than text boxes, we need to provide a button so that way when the user is ready to press that button, it'll calculate the wage. So we can get our button here and then put it somewhere there. Okay, and then you can do a few things to make this program look a little nicer. We can go here to the form, click on the form, and then we can go to the properties pane and we can adjust some of the main settings. Like, let's say I want to adjust the font size. Right now it's at 8.25. So I'm going to change that, maybe make it a little bit bigger, maybe 14. Right, and then now you see that the size of everything just increased. And that was the property for the entire form. Alright, so this is form 1. We could give this form a better name, like wage, or FRM for form wage. Right, so that way we know it's a form and it's for wages. Here in the title bar it says form 1. Let's look for title or text. For the form it's text, so it says form 1. So as soon as I change the text property of the form, then here on the title bar the name should change. So I'm going to do wage calculator, and then I'm going to press enter. Right, and then you see that the name changed here. Okay, so now let's modify some of the other controls that are here, like this label 1. Right, we need to change that to something more meaningful. So here the user's going to enter hours. I'm going going to put a colon, press enter. Here I'm going to put hourly wage, colon. And then you can move this around a little bit. And then here on this label, I'll put something like gross pay. And then this label is going to be for the output. Right now it has text in it. It says label 3. Right? We don't want it to say anything. So I'm going to delete label 3. And then you notice that the label kind of shrunk in size. So I'll fix that. Here on this property called auto size, it's set to true, and that's what's making it change size. So like, let's say I go to the text property here, I type a whole bunch of stuff, right, and then the label changes according to the size of whatever text is being given. Right, so that's what they mean by auto size. So I'm going to remove that property. I'm going to set it to false, right? And then now you see these bounding boxes. I can increase the size of this now. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a border on it, because right now it has no border. I'm going to change the border style to fixed 3D. Right, so then now it looks like a disabled text box, but it's really a label. Okay. Now here for this button, we're going to change two properties on it. First, I'm going to change the name, right? Because we have two kind of confusing properties. We have the text. The text is what's being displayed, where it says here button 1. Right, if we change this, we can put the word calculate, right? And then instead of saying button 1, now it has a more appropriate label. But just because we change the text here, that doesn't mean that now it's the calculate button. If we scroll back up to the top where it says name, its name is button 1. I mean, that's an okay name, but it's a better idea to name your controls to something more appropriate, because later on when you're trying to program them, you're not going to know what button 1 is for, what button 2, button 3, button 4. It's more difficult to keep track of. So as a good habit, follow the naming conventions from the textbook. So we first identify the control using a prefix. So in this case, this is a button, so it's going to be BTN, and then whatever the name of the button is. So I'm going to call it BTN calculate. Right, that's a more meaningful label. We still know it's a button, but it's the calculate button. Right, because we might add another button here to close the program. Right, so I'll bring this here. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. Right, and this button's not to calculate, this button is to close the program, so we can call it BTN close. Press enter. And then modify the text property to we'll call it close. Okay. Now let's modify the name of some of these text boxes or labels. So this text box here, we deleted the text that was in it, or it didn't have any text, I don't believe. But I could put something in here, right, and then it would appear. But I don't want that. So I'm going to change this from text box 1 to something more meaningful. So it's going to be the prefixes for a text box is txt, and then whatever the text box is for. So this text box is for hours, so it's txt hours. And then this next text box is text box 2. I'm going to change that to txt hourly wage. And then this last label here, I'm going to name it, instead of label 3, it's going to be LBL gross pay. Okay, so we've built a basic form. We can see how it looks once the user is going to start using it. So I can hit start here, and that'll build everything. And there's errors. Let's see what the errors are. Okay. Form 1 is not a member of wage calculator. Maybe the problem is it didn't like me changing the original name of the form. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to set form wage to form 1 the way it was before. Now I'm going to run it again. Okay, so that worked. So I guess just be careful when you rename the forms, or you could just leave it as form 1. Most of the projects that we're going to do are just going to be one form until later in the semester. Alright, so if I type, let's just say I worked 40 hours, I worked at $7.25 an hour, I hit calculate, it doesn't do anything, right? Because we've just set up the form and the text boxes, but we haven't programmed anything, right? So what are we going to do with this information? So that's going to be the next thing we're going to work on right now. And it's not going to close either because we haven't programmed the close button. So let's go ahead and close that out. Okay, so now we're back. So our program seemed to compile. A little bit of issues, but that's okay. So we need to program this form to work. The easiest thing you can do is on this button here, we're going to double click on it and we're going to build what you could call a function, or in this case it's called an event handler. Right? The event is when I click the button, something needs to happen. Right? So if you double click on calculate, then that takes us to our Visual Basic code. Right? So now we're ready to code this behind the scenes, the back end. You can think of it that way. Alright, so for btn calculate, for the click command or the click event, right, this code will run. Okay, so what we need to do in our form in order to get this to work is we need to take the text that's here, the text that's in this box, we need to convert them to numbers and then multiply them to give us our gross pay. Right, so if I worked 1 hour last week at $7 an hour, then my gross pay is $7. Right? If I work 2 hours, then it's 14. If I work 3 hours, it's 21, and so on. So best thing to do is start out with declaring some variables. So I'm going to declare one variable, and I'm going to set the data type to decimal. So decimal hours as decimal. So that'll hold the hours from the text box. Then I'm going to declare another variable, also decimal, and I'm going to call it hourly wage as decimal. Then I'm going to declare one more variable, and I'm going to call it decimal gross pay as decimal. Right. So now we have our memory allocated, so that way we can start getting the information from the text boxes. Right. So we need to start with decimal hours, and we're going to set that equal to whatever text is in the hourly wage, txt hourly wage, whatever's in its text property. Right. And then I'm going to get whatever's in the hourly wage text box, or yeah, well, I'm going to get what's in the hourly wage text box, and I'm going to assign it to the hourly wage variable here. Okay, and then now I'm ready to calculate the gross pay. The gross pay equals the number of hours times the hourly wage. Okay, so it's a good idea to put comments into your code, so that way we know what's going on when we see it. So to do comments, you do a single quote, and it turns green. And I'm going to label this as the variables. And then here, our process or operations. Right. So the first thing we did was we got the text from the text box, and we set it to a variable that's a decimal form, right? Because we can't add text or multiply text to text, because the text is not a number. It's just text. But once we get the information from here and convert it to a number that we can use, then we can multiply it and treat it like a regular number. Okay, so then once we have our gross pay, we need to display it to the user. Right, we set aside a label here that's going to be used to display the information. So that label is called LBL, gross pay, and then we need to set its text property equal to our gross pay variable. Right, and then we can label this with a comment. We can call it output. Okay, so I think this is ready to be used. Let's try it out. So then let's say I worked 1 hour. My wage is $7.25 an hour. And then I'm going to hit calculate. And it gave me a crazy number. Oh, I see a problem. Oh, and we don't have a close button yet. Right here I multiplied 725 times 725. So here I meant the hours are txt hours dot text. Okay, so then now let's run it. So that's one. I'm sorry. Yeah, I worked 1 hour at $7.25 an hour, and it gives me $7.25. I worked 3 hours, and it gives me $21.75. I worked 40 hours, and it gives me $290. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to put this close button. We need to make it work. I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna go to my form here. I'm gonna double click on close, and then now I have a new event handler for the click event of the close button. Right. So to program the close button, all we need to do is type me dot close, like that. Oh, no semicolon, sorry. Alright, this will close our form out. So let's run it again. 725, calculate, and then close. Yeah, so that worked. You can see all the code. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is that Visual Basic is very forgiving when it comes to different errors, and it's a little bit easier to code in VB as opposed to other more strongly typed languages. But let's say here, I'm going to zoom in. In this area here, I'm trying to get text information, and I'm trying to store it inside a location in memory that's a number. Right? A number and text are two different things. If we leave it like this, as you saw earlier, it works fine. But in other programs and in other situations, something like this would not work. So the best thing to do is whenever you're getting information from a text box, from its text property, we need to convert that information to the appropriate data type. So I'm going to convert this text using a procedure called convert DC. You see, and I did it all caps, but it's supposed to be the last two letters are lowercase, and you saw that VB fixed it for me, right? So this function here will convert whatever's in the parentheses. So this text will be converted to a decimal, and then that decimal will be stored in our DC hours variable. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to get whatever text is in the TXT hourly wages text box. I'm going to convert it to a decimal, and then I'm going to store it in the DC hourly wage variable, which is a decimal. And then here I'm trying to put a number into the text property of a label. All right. But like I said, a number and text are two different things. So this number, I need to convert it back to a string. So there's two ways of doing it. I'll show you this one way. If you type a dot, and it gives you the member access, it's called the member access operator. It gives us access to different methods. One of the methods that we could use is toString. So if we use toString, then it'll generate the text version of DC gross pay, so that way we can store it in the text property of the label. Now I know a lot of this is pretty confusing, but as you start practicing more, start reading the textbook, some of these things I'm talking about will make more sense. I just kind of wanted to show it to you so that way you know more or less what to expect throughout the semester, right? One cool thing about the toString method is that if you put it in a set of parentheses, if you put a format, if you supply a format provider, I'm going to put C, that should generate something that looks more like currency. Right, so I'm going to run this again. I'm going to put 1 here, 7.25. I'm going to hit calculate, and you see it puts a $sign for me. Right, so you don't actually have to format it. Before it didn't have a $sign. Now it does. Right, so that's one benefit in using toString whenever you're trying to convert a number back to text. Now you notice that we always use the same numbers, 1 and 7.25 for the wage. So in that case, what we could do is we could go back here to the text box, and in the text property here I could put a 1 for 1 hour, and then for hourly wage I could put 7.25, so that when we run this, those values are already there for us. Now the user can modify them if they want, but let's say you don't want to modify them, you just want the default. Hit calculate, and that 7.25 shows up. I put 2. Right, so it's a little bit less typing if the person that they're trying to calculate the gross pay for is working minimum wage. Right, so we can leave it $7.25 by default. And then there's a whole bunch of other things you can do. You can play around with this form. You can change the background color. Right, so you can go here, back color. You can change it to something else if you want. You can make it all black, but then you have the problem of the text being all white. Alright, so just keep that in mind. You can change the color of the text too. So maybe we'll do blue, and then this label here, I can set it to white. You can change the color of this text. That would be under for color, and then you can set it to different colors. And that's not required. I'm just showing you some of the things you can do. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you is how to save your work. So I'm going to go to File, Save All. I'm going to close out Visual Studio. I'm done. I'm ready to turn this into Blackboard. So I'm going to close this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to my Documents folder. And then I'm going to go under Visual Studio 2015. And then inside Projects, here's our wage calculator. And then if I click inside that folder, if I go inside Bin, inside the Debug folder, you should see an application file. Right, so you run that, and that runs our program. Right, so what we want to do to turn this in is, let's go back to the Projects folder, and this folder here, we're going to send it to a compressed zipped folder. Right, so this file here, the compressed zipped, is what you're going to submit to Blackboard. Now let's say later on you want to make a change to this wage calculator, you want to work on it later on. You could double click on the folder, and then this file here that's called Microsoft Visual Studio Solutions, the solution file, if you launch this will open Visual Studio, and it'll open up where you left off, right? And you can make changes to this. I can move the button here, I can do whatever I want, right? Those changes, if we save them, they're permanent, right? And then you can close this out. But this solution file is what allows you to continue working on it, right? It's how you access your project. Without that solution file, you won't be able to open your program, or you might be able to, but it'd be a lot more challenging. So when you submit your assignment, make sure you include that solution file along with the rest of the files. I've had students in the past turn in only this, right, without the actual project files, so pretty much everything is missing, and I can't load it, or I can't grade it, right? So just make sure that you zip the entire project folder and then submit this to Blackboard.